Hey guys, Stealth here. In this deck review I'm looking at a deck sent in by Elfwyn. He used this deck, which is a French Marines deck, in a very interesting way, and it is very well thought out. At least that is what I gathered from the description that he gave me when he entered this deck. He mentions that this French Marine deck is used to pierce through the enemy's still weak defenses at the beginning of the round using highly mobile tanks, AA and infantry carriers to safely deliver ACV into the enemy command zone. So this is something that you do mostly in maps like Straight to the Point, where you can actually get quite straight to the point using a command infantry in, for example, a helicopter or a VAB, and quickly try and get the enemy spawn so that you can bring in your own units from that side. So that is something that this deck is designed to do. When you do it like that early in the game, there is usually not a lot of resistance, as he pointed out. The enemy at this point normally expects an early airdrop and moves AA pieces and helicopters into position, which can be dealt with quickly using the VABs and the Mistrals and the Crotal. He also used the deck effectively in fast infantry pushes on Asgard, overwhelming enemy command zones and grabbing onto them with the Rima85. A problem though with this deck is that it has no armor. It has some tanks, but they could rarely be classed as armor. So let's have a look. Keeping in mind that this thing is designed to push through quickly capture terrain, and that is something that the French do very well. They don't have a lot of anti-armor capability, unfortunately. That is, they do have quite a bit of ATGMs, but not any tanks. So that is something that this deck is not very good at. But that can be overcome if you use the right units. So he mentions that he's going for a quick land grab. He has some infantry in a VAB in here. Now a VAB is definitely quick, but if you want to get an infantry unit delivered a little bit safer, you could go with deploying them in a Panther. Although you could say that since this deck has 0 helicopters and not the ability to bring in any helicopters at all, it's a good choice that he put them in a VAB, because that way this command infantry can stick to the main column. The main push, the main tank, or not tank column, the main infantry column, and with that be pretty secure, because it's hard to target any specific VAB if you don't know what's in there. So this is a very clever play. He also has some VAB command vehicles just to capture some zones. A FOB, VLRA Logistics, and Puma 330Ls, so not very interesting stuff there. Just the regular setup. Infantry, he has 2 cards of Mistrals, 1 card of F3 Milans, 2 cards of Rimas, and 2 cards of Commando Marines. Now, of course, in a Marine deck, this is a very solid setup. He has AA capability, although I think that 14 of these guys might be a bit much. You could go with 12, so have 1 card in here at Hardened, and have 1 card of these Mistrals at Veteran. This gives you a little bit more flexibility, it gives you a little bit more accuracy as well, but you could say that the accuracy on these things is already that good that they don't need the additional veterancy. Still, I think it's nice to have that bit of variety. He has 1 card of ATGM Milan F3s. Milans have excellent anti-tank capabilities, but the range is somewhat lacking. Still, it's nice to have these things in here, and they are brought in using VAB 2030s. 2013s. That is an interesting choice, because it doesn't give you that many vehicles. See, if you were to bring in the Milans in standard VABs... Oh, now I see what happened. Bear with me. We're going to delete the ATGM Milan F3s and 1 card of Rimas, which are transported in the VAB. We're going to bring in the ATGM Milan F3s in the VAB, so 7 of those, and then the Rimas in 2013s. That gives you a bit more Rimas and the same amount of ATGM Milan F3s, while getting these Rimas in a better vehicle. Maybe he did this intentionally, having the ATGM Milan F3s in a VAB 2013 with the autocannon. But I think that it is more effective to have those with the Rimas, because you get 3 more vehicles. Also, you could say that 20 Marines is enough, and you could say that it might be too much. If that's your thought process, you could go with 7 of these at Elite, but by then there is hardly any difference between them and Commando Marines. So in a situation like this, Commander Marines, which are also brought in a VAP 2013, one of them that is, again I would switch these around. Maybe he went with these 2013s intentionally, but I would do it like this, where you have... never mind, that's the difference. You cannot bring these in. I was going to say bring in one card of Commando Marines, or two cards of Commando Marines in 2013s, but you can only get 7. So this is his reasoning for not having them in more, or not having more of them in 2013s. I think this is a good setup. Having these Commando Marines in here is going to be really helpful, especially for jungle and urban warfare. Also, the Rimas have the capability of taking out heavy tanks. The Commando Marines are more geared towards medium tanks slash IFVs, because this LRAC has a little less AP power than the AP last carried by the Rimas. All in all, as I mentioned, this deck is very well thought out, and I completely agree with this setup. I just switched around some stuff like the Rimas and the HG Milan F3s in their transports, so that you have a bit more transports. Now you could say that he doesn't have any infantry and helicopters and that's a lack. Maybe. I'm not entirely convinced of that yet. But if you really want a bit more flexibility, if you want to be able to do a land grab early on, you could say I want to delete these Commander Marines and their VAB. I'm going to bring them in a pirate. A Puma 330H pirate. Because those are a bit faster than the VABs, and they might be able to arrive earlier than the enemy, whereas you have one large column of VABs and VAB 2013s using the roads. So that is a pretty susceptible target. Anyway, we're just going to leave it like this, because I think that this is a very interesting setup. Moving on to support, where we find one Spog, one Crotal, a Caesar, mortar carrier, and another mortar carrier. The VAB VDAAs, these are the Spogs. Now you can compare these things to the AMX 13s, and every time I make this comparison I'm going, yeah, they're both nice. See, the VABs are more maneuverable, so in this role the VABs are the better choice, because they can keep up with the main push of the VAB in the infantry tab, whereas the AMX could not. So in this situation I completely agree with the VAB choice. The AMX is a little bit better, both in range and in accuracy. It even has some more armor. Still, 2 armor versus 1 armor is barely going to make a difference. So in this case the VAB is a good idea, but in most cases I would go with the AMX 13. He also has the Crotal in here, and this of course is the AA battery. It can fire on the move at the same accuracy as sitting still. It's a wheeled vehicle, so very quick, 150 kph, and this is the mobile air defense combined with the VAB, except that the VAB cannot be firing on the move. It has the stationary tag, so this thing cannot fire on the move, so this is the main defense of that early push with the VABs. A Caesar is something that I always like to see in a French deck, because they are excellent artillery pieces. Just keep them near to a foul, because they only carry 18 rounds. Then he has short range artillery, or actually medium range I suppose you could say, in the form of these howitzers. 7700 meter range is good, but I think that these guys are redundant. I wouldn't use these guys per se, because this gives you I think too much mortar capability. He has 14 mortars in here, and these things don't really add anything. I find that I only use them in cases where I cannot bring in the VPM 120, and some decks just don't use these, and in those situations you can go with these guys, but again, it doesn't happen very often. So in this case I would delete these, since you already have 6 artillery units, and possibly go with the VLRA Mistral, which gives you a little bit more AA capability. Especially in that initial push, you can use these guys if you're faced with a lot of helicopters. Alternatively, you could bring in another card of Crotals, and this will give you a little bit more on-the-move capability versus helicopters and airplanes alike. And with the purpose that Elfwyn has in mind, I think that this is the better option. So we're going to go with 5 more Crotals. In the tank tab, he has the choice between AMX 13 Harpons and AMX 10 RC 5 SBs. He picked these because these are the fastest. These things are tracked, so they are not capable of keeping up with the main push. These things are because they are 150 kph road vehicles. Now they're not going to do a lot of damage. They do 15 AP power, which is nice for a 40-point vehicle, and they're very quick. The problem is that they don't have any armor, and he mentioned that in his description of the deck. They don't have any armor, he's aware of that, and that is something that other players will have to fill. So for example, working together with a Germany deck in this case might be very handy, or other units or other armies which have quite a bit of armor, like for example the British or the Americans. These guys, the AMX 10 RC 5Bs, he picked 2 cards, so he got 28 at Hardened, and I think that's the best choice for this deck, because it still gives you some anti-vehicle, anti-tank capability, not the heavy ones that the APLS on the infantry get, but still should be well enough. In the Recon tab, he has Commandos Para in Pirates, Mistrals, VBLs, AMX 10 RCs, and Alouettes. So this is a very well-rounded setup. You could say that he has too many of these recon units, but I don't think so. Because the VBL Mistral is pretty much a must-have in a French deck. And having some more VBLs, which can keep up with the main push, which can be deployed all over the battlefield with their very good optics and their excellent mobility, gives you a lot of information on where the enemy is going. He also gets these AMX 10 RCs, which are exactly the same ones as we saw in the tank tab. The only difference is that these guys are better geared towards recon. They get a little less AP power on the main gun, but they get good optics versus only medium optics. Otherwise, the stats are mostly the same. This thing has a little less armor, it has exactly the same machine gun, so this thing is just there to spot everything. The Commandos Para are coming in a pirate, which I completely agree with. In this case, of course, he ran out of VABs and VAB 2013s. VLRAs are something that I really wouldn't use, and the pirates give you a little bit of punching capability. Alouette 13s or Alouette 3s are good scouting helicopters. They're slowish. 210 is pretty slow for a helicopter, but still it should be well enough to keep these guys capable of spotting anything. Again, nothing I would change in the Recon tab. Let's have a look at vehicles. He's going with 14 Mephistos and 28 of these ERC 90s. You don't really have a lot of options in this deck, because the French Marines don't really get any heavy armored vehicles. But I think that these guys mostly fill the same role as the tanks. So he has a huge pool of these vehicles. Now I know that they're not exactly the same. The ERC 90 is somewhat inferior to the AMX 10 RC. Less accuracy, less AP power, less HE power, or same HE power, same rate of fire, less armor, but they're amphibious. And that is something that warrants their presence in this deck. This amphibious capability, combined with the amphibious capability of pretty much everything in this deck, means that it is very capable of doing pushes in areas where you might not expect them. So doing landings with these units over rivers, trying to come in from the side of an area. These could be combined with the VABs, whereas these tanks are not amphibious. I'm still somewhat hesitant to call them a tank, but okay, they're in the tank tab and they are called cavalry tanks, so we're going to stick to the tank tag altogether. 14 Mephistos, these are at Hardened, which is the right choice. You do get access to some other types of vehicles, like the Milan F2. They have a bit more AP power, but a lot less missiles, and you need to really babysit these Milan 2s to make sure that they keep firing. So that's why I agree with the Mephistos. And again, there's not a lot of alternative options that I could offer here. Helicopters cannot be brought in. So we're going to move on to the air tab, and again he has very little option here. So he went with 10 E-10 IVMs, so that's 10 bombers, and those are even at Hardened. 4 Super Etendars. These are the tank snipers, so he does have some heavy anti-tank capability in here. And 12 Crusaders, which unfortunately is the only air superiority fighter that you get. But these things are hopelessly outdated in 1964. They have a very short range on the missiles versus airplanes, 3150. Exceptional air detection though, but low ECM. Medium speed at 900 kph, it's pretty good. But the turn radius is not good, so you're really going to have to swarm modern fighters in order to try and get them. In the naval tab he has quite a bit of units as well. He has of course more command infantry, which works very well with the Rimas, so that he can quickly push into an area and try and capture it, where then the infantry and other tabs can flow out of. Got some Mistrals in there, good choice. These are the Mistrals at trained. You do get 4 of them at hardened, but I think 6 of them at trained is well enough. And I'm guessing that these Rimas are also at, yeah, they're also at hardened to make sure that you get a bit more availability for them. You could say that in this case it's also nice to have some Commander Marines or Legions. You could say that if you were to delete 1 card of Rima and put in 1 card of Legion 90, you get a bit more standoff capability because they get the Erics. I think that this would be a very good combination, so 1 Rima, 1 Legion and Mistrals, and you have a bit of everything. The only thing that they don't have in this deck is Recon. He does have a large amount of anti-ship planes, 3 cards, Tram Intruders, F-111Gs and Tornado MFGs I should say. So he has his anti-ship capability very well set up and 1 card of LCUs. These are probably there to reinforce the Rimas, although I don't think that this is the best way to fill this last slot. I would go with something that spots for these guys. So I would go with 1 more card of Hussards. And let's see if we can bring in, hang on, Legions before I forget them. 8 Legionnaires. And we're gonna go with Commando Para, because they got a bit more capability on the anti-tank front and they get a bit more spotting capability. This would be my ideal setup for the Marines tab. But again, Elfwyn, if you're watching this, if you disagree, by all means keep your own setup. He also asked me if there are any weak spots that are in this deck, if there are any sneaky tactics that I could figure out for this deck. Well, not that many. I think that your early land grab with the Vabs is a very, very good setup. You don't see it very often because it's a very risky play. Most players prefer a pretty safe setup, pretty standard push with the infantry and the vehicles, and to be honest, so do I. Sneaky tactics, I suggest going over rivers. There are some maps which have a river in the middle, and you can push into areas where they might not expect you, because pretty much your entire deck is amphibious. So I think that that would be an ideal option for you. If you have, as a viewer, any suggestions on how this deck can be improved further, please let me know in the comments. Copy the deck code below. That's the deck code I have. That's this deck. So the slightly altered deck. I hope you like it. If you did, please hit the like button. If you want to see more deck reviews and more Wargame Red Dragon replays, please subscribe to my channel. Hope you had fun watching this, and I'll see you next time.